It was a cold, rainy evening, the kind of night where most would seek warmth and safety indoors. But for one scruffy stray dog, the streets were all it had ever known, a relentless search for food, shelter, and maybe, just maybe, a little kindness. Under the dim glow of a police station sign, the dog stopped. It looked up, its fur soaked and matted from the rain. It didn't know what lay beyond the door. It didn't know if it would be welcomed or turned away. But desperation pushed it forward. The dog nudged the door open with its nose, stepping inside cautiously. The station was alive with movement and noise, officers talking, phones ringing, papers shuffling. For a moment, the room froze. Heads turned, startled by the unexpected visitor. The dog's tail wagged faintly, its eyes scanning the room. It looked at the officers as if it was pleading for something, maybe food, maybe warmth, or just a safe place to rest. But not everyone shared its silent hope. An officer stood up abruptly, clapping his hands and gesturing toward the door. "Shoo! Get out of here!" he said firmly. The dog flinched, its tail dropping. It backed away slowly, pausing at the door as if it wasn't sure where else to go. And then it left. Out into the rain, back to the cold streets that had become its only home. It lingered outside for a moment, watching the lights of the station from a distance before disappearing into the darkness. But little did anyone know, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something extraordinary. In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills, life moved at a steady pace. The police station stood as a symbol of order and protection, a place where the community's problems were solved and its peace preserved. Inside, the officers carried out their daily routines. Phones rang with reports of minor disputes, paperwork piled up on desks, conversations about upcoming patrols and local events filled the air. It was a familiar rhythm, a predictable routine. But outside, a very different story unfolded. The stray dog, soaked from the rain and shivering in the cold, wandered the streets. Its steps were hesitant, its body weary from endless days of struggle. With every glance, it searched for safety, for comfort, for a small sign of kindness. The rain continued to pour, turning the streets into glistening paths of water. The dog's movements were slow and deliberate, each step a reminder of the hardship it had endured. It didn't know where to go. Its instincts led it to the only place with light, warmth, and people, the police station. As the dog approached, the sounds from inside the station carried through the walls, laughter from one corner, the buzz of a radio from another. To the dog, it was a beacon, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise unforgiving world. It stopped just outside the station, hesitating for a moment. The warm glow of the lights reflected in its tired eyes. Its ears twitched as if listening for something, anything, that might indicate it could belong here, even for just a moment. And then, summoning the courage born from desperation, the dog took its first step inside. The dog stepped into the station cautiously, its wet paws leaving faint prints on the tiled floor. For a moment, it froze, its wide eyes darting from one corner of the room to another. The noise and commotion inside were unlike anything it had experienced before. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Officers looked up from their desks, their expressions a mix of curiosity and surprise. Some chuckled, amused by the unexpected visitor. Others frowned, annoyed at the interruption to their busy evening. The dog stood there, its tail wagging ever so slightly, a timid attempt to appear friendly. It took a few more steps forward, tilting its head as if trying to read the room. But the reaction wasn't what it had hoped for. One officer, seated at a desk near the entrance, sighed heavily and stood up. His chair screeched against the floor, the sound sharp and startling. "What's this dog doing in here?" he muttered, clapping his hands loudly. "Get out of here! Shoo!" he barked, waving his hands toward the door. The dog flinched at the sharp sound, its tail dropping instantly. It took a step back, then another, its eyes shifting nervously between the officer and the door. It didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. It wasn't welcome here. As the dog reached the door, it paused for a moment, turning its head back to glance at the room. Its gaze lingered, almost as if it were waiting for someone, anyone, to stop it from leaving. But no one did. With a final reluctant step, the dog pushed through the door and back into the rain. Outside, the cold wind bit into its soaked fur, and the harsh reality of the streets welcomed it once again. But even as it walked away, the station lights remained in its sight, a faint reminder of what could have been. Outside the station, the rain continued to fall relentlessly. The stray dog lingered near the entrance, its thin frame shivering from the cold. Despite being chased away, it didn't wander far. There was something about the place that felt different, something that gave it a sliver of hope. Inside, the officers went back to their routines, papers shuffled, conversations resumed, and the momentary interruption was quickly forgotten by most, but not by everyone. One young officer, seated near a window, had noticed the dog's hesitant retreat. Every few minutes he glanced outside, catching glimpses of the animal huddled near the station's steps, braving the rain as it waited for something, anything. "That dog's still out there," the officer finally muttered, standing up from his desk. His colleagues looked up briefly, some shrugging, others shaking their heads dismissively. "Just let it be. It's probably used to the streets," one of them said. But the young officer couldn't shake the image of the dog's pleading eyes. He grabbed a leftover sandwich from his desk, wrapping it carefully in a napkin before heading toward the door. Pushing it open, he was immediately greeted by the cold wind and the sight of the dog sitting patiently in the downpour. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, crouching down a few steps away. The dog lifted its head, its ears perking up slightly. Its tail wagged faintly, cautious but hopeful. The officer extended his hand, holding out the sandwich. "Here, you must be hungry." For a moment, the dog hesitated, its instincts warning it to be wary. But the hunger and kindness in the officer's voice were stronger. The dog took a few tentative steps forward, sniffing the air before gently taking the food. Its movements were careful, as though it feared the kindness might be taken away as quickly as it was offered. The officer watched, a small smile spreading across his face as the dog ate, its tail wagging a little more with each bite. It wasn't much, a sandwich and a few kind words, but for the dog, it was everything. And for the young officer, it was the beginning of a connection he never expected. The next day, the dog was back. This time, it waited just outside the police station, sitting quietly as officers came and went. It didn't try to enter again, but its presence didn't go unnoticed. Some officers rolled their eyes, dismissing it as a stray that wouldn't leave. Others, however, began to feel a sense of curiosity, and maybe even a little affection, for the persistent visitor. The young officer who had fed it the night before noticed it immediately. He approached with a small smile, holding another sandwich in his hand. "Back again, huh?" he said softly as he crouched down. The dog wagged its tail, standing up to meet him halfway. It seemed to recognize him now, its initial caution replaced with a glimmer of trust. As days turned into weeks, the dog became a familiar sight around the station. It waited patiently during the day and disappeared at night, only to return the next morning. Slowly but surely, it began to win over even the most skeptical officers. One day, an officer jokingly tossed a tennis ball toward the dog, expecting it to ignore the gesture. But to everyone's surprise, the dog darted after it, grabbing the ball and returning it with surprising enthusiasm. Laughter filled the station yard as the dog became an unexpected source of entertainment. It wasn't long before the dog started joining officers on their outdoor breaks, walking alongside them as if it were part of the team. Its loyalty and playful nature began to shine, and its impact on the station grew in ways no one had anticipated. For some, the dog became a comforting presence during stressful shifts. For others, it was a reminder of the simple joys in life, a brief escape from the pressures of their work. And for the young officer who had first extended kindness, the dog became a companion, a small but constant reminder of the power of compassion. Little by little, The stray transformed from an outsider to a cherished member of the station's unofficial family. The officers began to refer to it by a name they had collectively chosen, cementing its place in their lives. What had started as an interruption to their routine was now a part of it, and the station felt a little warmer because of it. One day, during a quiet moment in the station, a sergeant leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. The dog was there, as usual, lying peacefully near the entrance. It had become a fixture of their daily lives, but now the sergeant saw it differently. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "maybe it's time we make this official." At first, the suggestion was met with surprise. "Official?" one officer asked. "You mean, adopt it?" Another chuckled. "What are we going to do? Make it a cop?" The room filled with light laughter, but the idea took hold. Slowly, the conversation shifted from jokes to genuine plans. A few days later, the station gathered for an impromptu meeting. It wasn't about a case or a patrol. It was about the dog. The officers shared their experiences, the companionship it brought, the morale it boosted, and the way it had quietly become part of their team. The decision was unanimous. They would officially adopt the dog as the station's mascot and give it a proper place in their family. Excitement buzzed through the room as ideas flowed: what to name it, where it would sleep, and how to celebrate this unexpected addition to their team. On a bright morning, with the entire station present, they held a small ceremony. An officer placed a specially made collar around the dog's neck, engraved with its new name, Justice. The dog, now wagging its tail furiously, seemed to sense the significance of the moment. It wasn't just a stray anymore. It was part of something bigger. They even assigned Justice a playful role in the station. It wasn't a police dog in the traditional sense, but it became their companion, their greeter, and their emotional support during long, grueling shifts. Justice had found its home, and the station had found an unlikely hero. Justice quickly became more than just a mascot. It became a symbol of hope and resilience for the entire station. Whether it was a tense day of paperwork or a stressful night on patrol, Justice was always there to lift spirits. The dog had a knack for sensing when someone needed comfort. Officers who returned from difficult calls often found Justice waiting by their desks, its tail wagging gently, its eyes full of understanding. A simple nuzzle from the dog had a way of making even the toughest days a little brighter. Justice also had a special way of connecting with the community. During outreach events, it became the star of the show, drawing smiles and laughter from children and adults alike. Parents would share how their kids couldn't stop talking about the police dog they met, and local businesses even began leaving treats outside for Justice during its daily walks with the officers. It wasn't just about bringing joy, though. Justice started playing an unexpected role in the station's operations. It would often sit with nervous visitors, offering a calming presence to victims or witnesses. Its presence turned an intimidating experience into a more human and empathetic one. One story, in particular, stood out. A young boy, who had been frightened after witnessing a theft, refused to speak with anyone. Justice, sensing his fear, quietly walked over and sat by his side, resting its head on the boy's lap. Slowly, the boy began to relax, stroking Justice's fur as he opened up about what he had seen. That moment reminded everyone why Justice was more than just a stray. Justice was a healer. As the weeks turned into months, Justice became a beloved figure in the town. People began dropping by the station, not for complaints or reports, but just to see the dog that had become a local legend. Justice had started as an outsider, but now it was a hero in its own right, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. And for the officers, Justice wasn't just a pet. It was a reminder of how a small act of kindness could grow into something extraordinary. In giving Justice a home, they had gained far more than they ever expected. A friend, a companion, and a symbol of the best of humanity. Justice's story didn't end with becoming the heart of the police station. It continued to inspire. News of the stray-turned-station mascot spread beyond the small town, capturing the attention of nearby communities and even local media. Articles were written, photos of justice with the officers went viral, and soon justice became a symbol of second chances. Donations began pouring into the station, not just for justice, but for other strays in need. Inspired by Justice's journey, the officers started a community program to rescue and rehome stray animals. They called it Justice's Initiative, and it quickly gained traction. The program partnered with shelters and local businesses to provide resources for lost and abandoned animals. Justice became the face of the initiative. At events and fundraisers, it was always there, tail wagging, greeting attendees, and posing for photos. People who had never visited the station before now came in droves, eager to meet the dog who had sparked so much change. One of the most touching moments came during a special ceremony where the town's mayor awarded Justice an honorary badge. The entire town gathered to celebrate, cheering as the badge was fastened onto Justice's collar. "This is more than just a badge," the mayor said. "It's a reminder that every life, no matter how small or forgotten, has the power to make a difference." Justice's story began as one of survival, but it became so much more. It was a story of transformation, of how a single act of kindness could ripple through an entire community, inspiring compassion and change. And so, Justice continued to walk the halls of the police station, not as a stray, but as a hero. Its journey from the cold streets to the warm hearts of an entire town served as a powerful reminder. Sometimes the ones who need help the most have the greatest potential to give it back. Justice's legacy grew with each passing day, proving that a small, scruffy dog could not only find a home, but also create one. For others, for a community, and for hope itself.